My name is Wendy All.
And if you can just a little bit about what does your interest in comics or anything involving Comic Con really begin in your life?
Well, Comic-Con began in my life when I was in high school. There were some boys in my chemistry class, and they all read science fiction and played chess. And there was one boy by the name of Bob Arndt, and he said, and I'll do my best, Bob Arndt, "Have you heard of Comic-Con?" And so I said, "No." And he says, "Well, you must come with us to a meeting." And so he talked a little bit more about it. And because Comic Con also was interested in things having to do with science fiction, and the people that were interested in going to it were interested in science fiction. And I was too. I read a lot of it. And I also liked Lois Lane comic books and some of the horror comic books and the Ripley's Believe It or Not, that kind of stuff. I thought, well, let's see what this is about. And so a bunch of us got into Bob Arndt's father's car and drove out to Pacific Beach. And I can even read you, if you'd like, my account of my first Comic-Con meeting in Ken Kruger's store and his bookstore, the back of his bookstore, and the very first time I met Sheldorf. My father had these blank books bound for me at the San Diego State Bookbindery, and I kept them as a journal. And so what I'm going to read to you is this account of my first meeting with Sheldorf.
What date was that?
This would have been in 1973. I didn't put dates on purpose in my journal. It was whatever. Bob's father drove us out to Pacific Beach. The car went through so many old back roads that grew high with weeds that I would never have been able to retrace my way back home. When we finally did get to the front of the bookstore, it wasn't exactly what I expected. The beach was a block away, and even though it was cool and overcast, people walked around through the streets in bleached and cut-off Levi's. The front of the bookstore was littered with papers and advertisements along sort of a bulletin board wall. The ground in front of it was littered with empty cans and broken bottles. There was a sign taped to the cracked glass on the door of the shop. "Meeting around back" was scrawled in red felt tip pen. We walked through the parking lot and around to a narrow side alley that was surrounded by old brick and chipped plaster. There was a metal door with no handle that had a sign written in masking tape with "Knock" in blue crayon. Next to it was another piece of tape that added, in orange, as a second thought. It read, "Loud." We knocked and kicked the door until it was answered by a man who was very stout with childlike features. He grinned at Igor and said, "Hello, you're early. Come on in. You might like to look at some of the new stock." He sounded very excited. He led us up an open wooden stairway. Under the landing were boxes of books. The place smelled of ancient paper. Lining the stairway were old comic books, sex manuals, and magazines. We were led past a series of bookcases in a very short hall with a slanting ceiling to a room. Inside, light poured in through the windows, covering the ceiling, and made the lavender walls too bright to look at anything for too long. There was a mattress in the middle of the floor and more books and more boxes of books. The man hurried over and put the top on an open jar of peanut butter on an open carved table and wrapped up the bread inside because Shell had been living in the bookstore. He smilingly said, "Make yourselves comfortable," as he took the food from the room. The corners were jammed with boxes and wooden crates, and I assumed held more books and magazines. Covering a portion of the lavender walls were movie posters from Laurel and Hardy and Gone with the Wind. There was a hole in the wall, perfectly round, and a wire sticking out of it. This led to the ceiling of a sort of main outlet with 6 or 7 plugs leading to various parts of the room. And then later I put in this, "Well, so much for that. This is my description of meeting Sheldorf and attending a meeting for the first time of the committee for San Diego Comic Convention." So this would have been in 1973. I mean, it was a thing that had taken me so much by, because I was from a very typical middle class background, to be going to a place like that. That's why I describe all of the way that it looked in such detail, because it was kind of shocking to me. But it was, for me, also this cool walk on the wild side, and I was hooked. totally hooked. And these people were just so wonderful and brought me into their family, so to speak. The fact that I wasn't straight comic books, the fact that I was just interested in learning, the fact that I was an underage girl, all of these things were to later have an effect because it wasn't long after that that the meetings were moved from this bookstore, which also contained this candle that was shaped like a penis that had a sign on it that said, yes, this is a candle. And I think that Ken, being a good dad, was just concerned that some mother or father might hear about the meetings happening in this bookstore that was a comic book store that also happened to sell adult books. The meetings were moved to the El Cortez. So that's part of that story. So
Okay, so you meet Sheldorf and a lot of the committee members at this meeting. So what was your initial reactions about like of Shell, of other figures like Richard Alf, Mike Towery, Barry Alfonso? What did you think of meeting all this fledgling committee that would become the first committee to found a Comic Con? What was your initial reactions of people?
well, my initial reaction, as I said, was this was a little bit for me of a walk on the wild side, but these people were so fascinating. And I got to know them one by one. I knew Igor from high school, and Barry Alfonso I met through him, or was it the other way around? Those kinds of things blur a little bit. And I remember Barry was always coming in with, you know, stacks of things under his arm and saying, "Look what I found! Look what I found!" And it was that kind of a thing. And Igor was more kind of with his hands in his pocket saying, yeah, that's pretty interesting. And he would make, some comment. And they were, Igor and Barry were an interesting pair as far as their whole political views. They listened to Lenny Bruce recordings, which was actually very sophisticated for that time. The fact that Igor's father allowed him to even listen to Lenny Bruce recordings was, kind of an interesting thing. And Barry was just always quietly full of energy, if you know what I mean by that. Barry was like a live wire, in a lot of ways. And Shell, when I first met him, I just remember thinking, because he was wearing one of those, I guess those like golf hats that men wear. And I remember that he just had such a pleasant, childlike way about him. And I didn't believe that such adults could exist. You know what I mean? He was just so welcoming and wanted us to become part of things. And in this bookstore, I remember we all sat on the floor or sat on mattresses or that kind of thing. And back at that time, for me, I thought, wow, this is what hippies do. And so that aspect of it also made me feel really part of something that in my very middle class upbringing wouldn't have happened because my parents were very, straight-laced and
You said you were in high school at the time?
yes, I went to Patrick Henry High School, and that's the other school that existed in that area was Crawford. Patrick Henry had just been built like a few years prior to, because that area was expanding so much. So a lot of the people who were originally in Comic-Con and on the committee were in Crawford, like I believe it was Scott Shaw and Roger Friedman. But because of where I lived, I was going to Patrick Henry. And as I said, that's where I met Bob Arndt and um, Igor Goldkind and Jim Means and several other people that dragged me to my, and it wasn't so much dragging me, it was like, I just wanted, what is this about? What is this about? And so, I just went to the meeting.
So did you have any previous like interest in comics, science fiction movies before?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. One of my favorite genre of science fiction is things that get big in the desert because of radioactivity. And, it was one of those things when I was a little kid, our babysitter, because I was in Michigan in the first, like the first 10 years of my life. The babysitter would come over, and there was the equivalent of the Elvira, of Michigan. And I don't even remember what her name was. They would have Friday night movies, and the babysitter would come over, and my parents would go out, and we would watch these great science fiction movies and stuff like that. And of course, a lot of kids read comic books, and I read the Sunday comics, and my parents did too. And as a matter of fact, my mother didn't really understand the whole thing about Comic-Con. In fact, the way I was able to convince her that it was okay, I said, Mom, this meeting is going to be in a bookstore. And so she said, oh, well, that's okay then, you can go. And I mean, of course, had she driven us there and the whole thing, it would have been a different matter. But when I came back from one of the conventions and showed her my picture that was drawn for me of the Dragon Lady by Milton Caniff, she said, oh, I get it. And so then my parents came to Comic-Con in 1977, and then it was okay. So
were you at the first conventions?
I was not at the first conventions. As a matter of fact, I started going to the meetings in 1973. During that summer, I had gotten, because I was a science student and had done very well in the science fair, I had gotten a scholarship to work at the Salk Institute as a summer science student. And so because of that, I was not able to attend the 1973 convention. And because I was an exchange student to Guadalajara in 1974, prior to going to UCSD, I wasn't able to attend the 1974 convention, but I still attended the meetings. So my first convention that I attended was 1975.
Nice. And you're being part of these committees. Did you take what sort of programming or items did you take part in planning?
I just went to the meetings because I was just fascinated by the whole process of things, and I kept I kept thinking I'd like to go to these, but then school issues kept coming up, and being more academic, and because of the way that I was raised, it was like, no, this is more important than this. And as a matter of fact, what happened to me was, to make my parents happy, I got a degree. I started out as, I probably would have been either an archaeologist, a geologist, or something along those lines. I got a degree in linguistics, sort of to please my parents at UCSD. And then I went to art school, and it's all because of Comic-Con. I went up to Art Center.
Nice. So can you describe the first convention you went to?
You know what? I need to think about it. What I think my favorite memory of the El Cortez was this. You would get in the elevator of the El Cortez, and it would, every time the elevator door would open, it would be like this living tableau, because people would be getting on and off, and everybody was wearing costumes, and then the doors would close, and you'd go up another floor, and then the elevator would open, and then it would be this whole different series of costumes, and then the door would close. And it was like that every time you went up and down the elevator of the tower of the El Cortez. That's my most intense memory of it, other than being able to sit and go out to lunch with people, and the welcoming way that people like Jack Kirby and Ray Bradbury and George Clayton Johnson would be, well, come on, we're going to go for lunch, or we're going to go for dinner. And you would tag along, and you felt like some little puppy, but they were just so welcoming. And what are you interested in? And what do you like to do? And at that time, maybe some people are really lucky and they know what they want to do from the time they're a really little kid. I was not that lucky. There were so many things I was interested in that I was trying to narrow it down more than anything else. But that was the other great thing. Also, by the pool of the El Cortez, the way that people would be there, and you'd hear a voice. Like for me, that was how I found out that Dawes Butler, the voice character actor, was there, because I thought, my God, that sounds like Huckleberry Hound by the pool. And and then I was introduced to this person, and then he was talking to June Foray, and she has, you know, a very distinct voice, you know, as a voice character actress, and Theodore Sturgeon, and it was just like Alice in Wonderland. You know, every place I looked was some new experience of, you know, growing taller or growing shorter, or I like to describe Comic-Con as being like the Addams family, and you know, we're all a little different, but we're all loved and accepted for who we are. And that's one of the things that I think from 1973 on attracted me and kept me coming back to the meetings, even though I didn't even go to the conventions for 2 years, is that I thought, these are my people. And so I, you know, just became a part of it.
Okay, so I want to go back to more of the planning meetings since you've attended a majority of them instead of conventions. It's what was the planning like working with Sheldorf, Richard Alf, um, Scott Shaw, and all these other figures who are like becoming or starting to become like who they are today. It's what was the environment of the meetings like?
Well, people were drawing, people were paying, you know, attention to each other and having, you know, inner discussions while, you know, other people were kind of running the meeting. And it was organized disorganization in a lot of ways, because behind the scenes, I think, um, people like Shell and Richard Butner, who by the time I was there he was beginning to be the you know, more in charge of things. Um, and Ken was always, you know, one of the quiet forces in the background that just, you know, made everything run along smoothly. And Shell was, you know, sort of the big public relations person who had everybody's phone number. As a matter of fact, Shell was the one that would organize these interesting little day trips. There was one where after a meeting, he said, you know what? Chuck Jones is staying over at the whatever it was hotel, and I had called him and I need to go talk to him about Comic-Con. So we went over to this hotel, and by coincidence, as we walked in the lobby, it was, you know, because Shell and Richard were going to go find out his room number so they could talk to him. But he was standing in the lobby because apparently he was visiting his grandchildren in San Diego. So they just had this great conversation, and just watch this, you know, it was great. There was another weekend we went up to June Foray's house to an ASIFA convention, and it has to do with animation. And they were selling a lot of animation cells and things like that. And Ray Bradbury was there, and there were a number of people there, but I remember Ray Bradbury and of course June Foray, and it was at her home in Woodland Hills. And so Shell was saying, well, you know, while we're up here, we wanted to invite Harlan Ellison to come to the convention. And Igor Goldkind was there, and I I know Barry was there. And they were saying, well, let's call him up. And Shell said, okay, well, we have the phone number. So they called him up, and they said, put Wendy on the phone. He likes girls. And so I talked to him, you know, Mr. Ellison, you know, I'm here at the ASIFA convention for but we would like to talk to you about Comic-Con. And so then I hear Barry and Igor in the background kind of egging me on. Tell him Ray Bradbury tells him, you know, that he should go, because Ray Bradbury was saying, you know, because he was a big supporter of Comic-Con, that he should go to the convention. And I said, well, as a matter of fact, Ray Bradbury says that you should come. He's here right now. I'm at June Foray's house at this ASIFA event. And he says, oh yeah, put him on. And so we were able to call him right over to the phone. So Ray Bradbury got on the phone with Harlan Ellison and said, you know, you really need to at least talk to these people. So Harlan Ellison invited us over to his home in Woodland Hills. I have pictures for evidence, and gave us a tour of his house. And it conflicted with his schedule that upcoming time to come, but he did come to Comic-Con. But it was just very interesting to be able to say, well, Ray Bradbury says you should come. Well, put him on the phone. The fact that we were able to do that, and you know, it just worked out well.
So I know you're probably one of the few women sitting on these committees besides Jackie Estrada. Was it just you two
Well, there were a lot. There were a few other women. There was Charlene Brinkman, who is now known as Brink Stevens, and I know at that time she was the girlfriend of Mark Fogg. And now I'm going to talk out of school. David Stevens had the most amazing crush on Charlene Brinkman that I knew about, but he swore me to secrecy. And one of the reasons why Dave had a crush on her was because she resembled Betty Page, the pinup model. And so that was a big deal. So I don't know what transpired behind the scenes, but eventually Dave Stevens and Charlene got together. And I'm trying to think of other things. Could you ask that question again?
Yeah. Just what roles were women stepping into?
Oh, the women, yeah. Well, okay, truthfully, some people were girlfriends that came along. Jackie and I, and people like Vicky Kelso, and well, we actually now look back as kind of the first girls club. You know, that's our unofficial name. Um, we were the first young women that were not coming with boyfriends. We were coming because we were honestly interested in this type of thing. And as I said, Shell was very welcoming. Ken Kruger was very welcoming. There was none of this, I'm sorry, we don't, no girls allowed. There was no girls allowed. It was happening. And it was actually kind of fun because these guys were all really nice to us, and welcoming to us. And I mean, of course, there was the silly high school joking stuff and flirting stuff. It was fun. It was fun. So, but what was nice, it was nice to be taken seriously. Not that I'm just some girl. And this was, around the time of the women's movement and all of that. And I don't think that there was a political agenda involved with it. I think it was just, the Addams family. We were all loved and welcomed for who we were.
You talked about the women's movement and then the period of the 70s, which is the culture, the cultural change, the cultural movement of America in this time. It How did that play into, I guess, did people see you differently in school, like you're hanging out with all the comic book guys?
I was a nerd. I was nerd girl. All the girls that were on the drill team and doing their little thing. I was in the band. I mean, it was like I could not have made, more nerdy choices. I was taking chemistry. I was taking math. I was college bound. I was, in the science fair. I might as well have had, nerd, geek, on my forehead. And it wasn't that people treated me badly. What I loved about my high school, Patrick Henry, was that there were about 3,000 people there. So there were around 1,000 people in my graduating class. So if you couldn't find your peeps, then you really were, kind of different. And what was nice was I found my peeps in my chemistry class, and they led me to Comic Con. And the women's movement doesn't happen overnight. I mean, it's not, or any movement doesn't happen overnight. It's not like everything changed when Mary Tyler Moore threw her hat in the air. That's just not the way it was. Things happened gradually. In fact, you know, even to this day, men of a certain age will call me honey. And I realize there's no way I can explain to them, that you don't call someone honey. How those the things that just gradually change over time. And, what was nice was that as the political correctness or the political, I don't even know what you would call it, as things began to shift, where it used to be girls don't do that or girls can't do that or girls shouldn't do that. I mean, I remember I wanted more than anything to learn how to use a soldering iron. And it was like, well, girls don't take shop classes. That was the early message. When I was in seventh grade, I had to take a sewing class. I had to take home economics and stuff like that. That was required for girls to take. And I know now it isn't. I'm really glad I can sew. I'm a toy designer. And so to be able to sew and make soft toy design things, that I'm really glad that I had that background experience. And I can make alterations on whatever I need to. But at the same time, it would have been nice to have other choices, like learning how to use a soldering iron, because maybe I would have gone more into electronics. I don't know.
So did being involved in Comic Con lead you into your current field into toy design?
Yes, it did. I started out in the direction of being a scientist. Well, let's begin at the beginning. I always liked to draw. My father worked at a radio station. He would bring home the scripts, and I would get all this paper in different pastel colors, and I would get to draw pictures on the other side of paper done in pastel colors. Because for radio scripts, they would, like the blue would be for the news, the yellow would be for something else, the pink would be for something else. So they were color coded. But for me, man, this was like great stuff. I'm talking late 50s, early 60s. And so I draw, I liked to draw. And so, the whole thing, you practice drawing, you get better at it. And I was the one in school, oh, Wendy, teach me how to draw. Oh, Wendy, you're the one that's going to draw the poster for whatever. But as I grew up, my parents, who were not discouraging people at all, they were saying, be realistic. A career in art is a very difficult thing. You need to get serious, and we're not going to tell you what to do because you have to earn, you're the one that has to earn the living. But, take a big look at the spectrum of things. Well, I was also a big rock hound. I was interested in anthropology, archaeology, and so I thought, okay, these sciences are the direction I want to go into. But because I was brought up in a multilingual family, languages was also interesting to me. So I had this array of the social sciences that I was looking at. A lot of my science fair projects were in psychology and social sciences and things like that. And that's what led for me, to me working at the Salk Institute, all those things that look good on a college resume. And so I started out at UCSD as a biology major, looking at, how am I going to, do this? And eventually I ended up graduating in linguistics. However, because of the influence of Comic-Con, I was ready, I won't say to quit in the middle, I was ready to transfer. But there were several family members that said, no, you need to finish your degree. You need to get a degree. Absolutely, you'll be sorry for the rest of your life if you don't get a degree. And so, because I could have transferred right over to an art school type of thing. But so I got a degree in linguistics, and then I applied to Art Center and got into Art Center, and so now I have a BA in linguistics and I have a BFA in advertising and illustration, and it was all because of Comic-Con. And now I will tell you the reason. When I was younger, my parents not understanding, and also my teachers not understanding, because the first 10 years of my life in the Midwest, people made their life, they're living in the auto industry and things like that. And art was something you did as a hobby. But I would go to Comic-Con, and one year I would see people talking about something. And the next year when I would go to Comic-Con, there it was as a reality. So to see that process and understand that process that was happening at Comic-Con, it demystified it. It made me realize that people can do this and people can make money at it. And so that was really what the motivation was for me. It was all based on Comic-Con that I realized that, yeah, you really can do it. And the mentorship, absolutely.
And who was mentoring you?
There wasn't any one specific person. It was just, I have all these letters from all these different people that were just encouraging me and taking me seriously, and you go girl, kind of thing. And so it was like that. It was the fact that I could see it, see people talking about it, and instead of them, oh, one of these days I'm going to do this. Oh, one of these days maybe I'll do this. It was like, see this? I'm working on this, or I have this idea for this. And the next year, there it would be. Or, better yet, I'd be walking into a bookstore, and there it was. And in fact, I have to tell you that one of the most exciting things about that I had happened to me. I worked at Mattel Toys for a number of years in the 80s and the 90s too. Um, the first time I ever saw one of my toys on the shelf at Toys R Us, it was like I had just given birth. It was better than giving birth. And I understood the thrill that some of these people at Comic-Con had. So, that's what it was.
So how does it feel to see? Because I'm pretty sure you see some of your toys on the floor of Comic Con or a lot of these other conventions. How does that feel that it comes back to a place where you began your career?
Well, in some ways, it makes me feel old because I see stuff and I think, oh, this is 35 years or 30 years, or I remember doing this toy in 1989, or, whatever. Um, it makes me feel like I've really had an influence on the culture. That's, I think, the most exciting thing to me. It's like My Little Pony, Disney princesses. I mean, I didn't invent them, but, I worked on them. I can point to this play set or that play set that I did for Lady Lovely Locks or Rainbow Bright, or, some of these toys that are just out in the world. And that's exciting to me. And, the fact that those things that I worked on are what excited kids and are getting them involved in this kind of thing now. I mean, I feel like I'm more than a mother, and that's what I feel the originators like Sheldorf and Richard Elf and Ken Kruger. I'm sure that's the feeling that they had. So for it to come around to full cycle like that, it's like I know how it feels. So I have a lot of satisfaction.
Nice. So I know I'm going to sort of jump into the future a little bit. So how does this culminate now with bringing Cafe Frankenstein back to life?
I feel like with Cafe Frankenstein, I'm paying back George Clayton Johnson for being a wonderful influence on my life. Um, the whole thing with Cafe Frankenstein is bringing back a time. I was born in 1956, and Cafe Frankenstein was started in 1958. So obviously, I wasn't there. But like decorations and things that my parents had in their house when I was little, I can kind of relate to that sort of mid-century look that things had. And Cafe Frankenstein, the idea that it was conceived by an artist, a musician, and a writer who all went on to have these amazing careers um, is thrilling to me. And I'm hoping that it inspires people to not only go back and, climb in the Wayback Machine and come to Cafe Frankenstein, hang out, listen to all these great stories in a nice informal atmosphere, get a little food, look at the art on the wall, and just absorb it and get to know people, in the same way it was at Comic-Con in the early days at the El Cortez.
Also, like the El Cortez.
Um, well, there were a lot of different rooms at the El Cortez where people hung out. And, of course we have by the pool here. This is this would be like the Denny's, but, Denny's Plus, or, the place where people could sit and eat and just hang out and listen to programs. If I remember, oh, I know what it is. At the early days of Comic-Con, we were able to have banquets and brunches. And the idea of the banquet was that you could buy a seat at a table with Ray Bradbury, or you could buy a seat at a table with any of the people that were guests. And so you were one of 9 people. I mean, Ray Bradbury, and maybe he would have a guest, one of 8 people. Same thing with Sunday morning brunches. You could buy a table, and look who showed up. Frank Capra. Bonus. And so that's what Cafe Frankenstein is like. It's like the banquets and the brunches. You know, you've got food, you've got, you know, people to hang out with, and all you're doing is buying potato chips or a latte or something or a bagel, but you can sit and talk to these people or listen to people tell their stories. So we've got people who are showing up that aren't even advertised. So bonus, you know, people will be able to see and talk to different people that, you know, maybe is somebody that's inspiring to them. One of the things that they did at the brunches, and I believe at the banquets, they would have um, artists drawing cartoons that they would later auction off. And I actually have documented in my pictures a picture of Jack Kirby drawing Chuck Norris. And Chuck Norris was standing there kind of stiffly, you know, posing for him. And Jack Kirby was already, you know, doing the Jack Kirby, you know, stance of this thing. And I remember that got auctioned off for quite a good deal of money, but, you know, to help support the convention. But that was what was cool about these brunches, and that's what was cool about the banquets. And of course, the convention got to a certain size where, you know, they could, you know, the banquets would sell out, and they couldn't, you know, please everyone. So after it, I believe it was in the 80s, they stopped. They had, you know, out of just sheer size. So that I think was a sad loss, you know, that ability to, you know, just sit and hang out with people. So that's what Cafe Frankenstein is, an attempt to try to recapture.
And how much were tickets for these banquets?
Well, I keep wanting to say $10 for a banquet ticket. Somebody might have to corroborate with that because I wasn't in charge of, you know, the money for that. I know in 2012 dollars that seems laughable, but that was in the 70s. A pair of Levi's cost $6, and everybody had to have Levi's, you know, because that was what was cool. So for me, whenever I think about how I match up prices, a pair of Levi's in 1972 was $6. So a banquet ticket was more than a pair of Levi's. So, you know, that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what it may or may not be now by the equivalent.
Definitely. I'm going to bring this back to a little bit since we're back into the realm of San Diego. Going back to the 70s, what makes San Diego this place that creates Comic Con, that brings Sheldorf here from Detroit and brings together this group of high school students, um, youth who are pretty much not part of that mainstream, and they're able to create something. What is it about this city that makes Comic Con? Or is it Comic Con makes San Diego, or is it the other way around?
San Diego is a beautiful city, and I think it attracted people for one reason or another because of its beauty. Um, I know there were a lot of military here. I came here with my family in 1966 when I was 10 years old. My father helped to put the San Diego Television Authority, the educational television, on the air. He was in broadcasting. And he took one look around, and they still live here. He's had many job offers in other places. And I think many people come to San Diego and they say, I'm not leaving. And I think that the case of what makes San Diego special is the strange diversity. I mean, every town has diversity, but the beach community, which is where Barry Alfonso and Igor Goldkind originally met, and then Barry uh, was still living out near the beach. Igor's father was a teacher at San Diego State University, and if I'm remembering correctly, he moved closer, and that was why Igor came to Patrick Henry High School, and Igor kind of inseminated, you know, Patrick Henry because he was friends with Bob Arndt and Jim Means. And then there were the students at Crawford, the Woodchucks. And I think in most cities there were small groups of people that were unusual. I mean, there were always like the photography club, types of people, and they were a little odd. Or, I mean, it's the equivalent of like people who are bird watchers. And that's not to say bird watchers are odd, but, what brings people together? And I think that sort of the magic of San Diego had to do with Sheldorf moving here, him finding Barry Alfonso's ad. I mean, it's that being connected thing that the fact that there was a place to meet. Shell had the know-how of how to put on conventions, and people just started collecting. It was like a little magnet of attraction, and it was happening in other places, I'm sure. But San Diego is such a beautiful place that to even consider moving Comic-Con out of San Diego, it would be something else. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It was a question asked when we were interviewing Michael and Jackie about what is it about San Diego? And I know Scott had a really eloquent answer as well earlier today. And it's just amazing that what it's become. It's because of like San Diego people.
It could be San Diego people. It could be what kind of people are attracted to San Diego. It could be that we're not Los Angeles or trying to be anything other than San Diego. I'm not a native San Diegan, but this place, there was a saying, San Diego feels good all over. I live in Los Angeles because of my career, and my husband he works in the studios. He's a studio musician. We can't leave Los Angeles because of our careers. But every time I'm driving down here and I get past Tustin and I get into San Diego County, I totally know San Diego feels good all over because I can feel Los Angeles just lifting off my shoulders. So there is something special about San Diego and San Diego people. It's the absolute truth. Yeah. Okay. Well, what I'm showing you here is this is me in 1973. I had won a scholarship to work as a summer science student at the Salk Institute. And this is Mabel Humphrey, who was at the time, I believe, 88 years old, or 85, or right in that area. I mean, to us, that was like, Anyway, this is the reason why I was not able to attend Comic-Con in 1973. Let's see what I can find here. That's okay, we'll have to wait while I find the next Group O stuff here. And then I was in Guadalajara. I want to see that picture. To see if there's a Guadalajara picture that, yeah. Okay, you can look at this. I was in Guadalajara in the summer of 1974, and I took an art class there. Let's see. Yeah, this is one of the main mercados in Guadalajara. But this is the reason why I was not able to attend Comic-Con in 1974. Here, this is Mexico City, so this is one of the pyramids. So this is the reason why I was not able to attend. I was an exchange student in Guadalajara. So the first Comic-Con that I was able to attend, this is when we met Harlan Ellison at his house. There I am. There's Igor Goldkind. Behind is Richard Butner. But there's Harlan Ellison in front of his house. And this is that story that I had told about Ray Bradbury when we called him up. And here's more Harlan Ellison. This is Brian Smith, Igor Goldkind. This is Brad Anderson's son, Harlan Ellison. And then this is me at the tender age of 19 with Harlan Ellison. I'm glad I found that picture. I wasn't sure. Oh, here we go. So my first Comic-Con, I had my blank book. Other people at Comic-Con were getting pieces of illustration board and having the pieces of illustration board signed as a kind of, autograph piece. And because I had my journal, I believe I was the first person that brought a blank book into Comic-Con and asked people to sign pages. So Russell Myers, he did Broomhilda. Brad Anderson did Marmaduke. Sergio Aragones did this wonderful drawing. This is all from the 1975 convention. Dick Moores did Gasoline Alley. Mel Lazarus did something called Miss Peach, but he also did Mama. And Mama was a nice Jewish mama, and he would always talk about being a nice Jewish boy. Don Rico did Daredevil. Here's Stan Lee on a panel, and it makes me sad I had such a little click-clack thank you Kodak camera, but at least I had that. This is Stan Lee, and I will identify who is in this picture. This is Don Rico, this is Captain Sticky, and this is Stan Lee. This is a drawing by Dave Stevens. He also did a drawing of me. This was done at the brunch. This is a drawing by Jack Kirby, and you can see right down here, this is Jack Kirby, and this is Chuck Norris posing for him. This is Bob Clampett, who did Beanie and Cecil, and he actually took his hand and traced around his hand like this to do Cecil, because Cecil, before Beanie and Cecil were cartoons, they were a puppet show on television. This was something that Larry Niven, the science fiction writer, had done for me. He said, "I'm sorry I can't draw, but I can show you how to construct a cheap dome for a low-pressure environment on a different planet," being a science fiction writer. And this is Ray Bradbury. And the story about this is Ray Bradbury said, Picasso gets requests for artwork all the time. And so what he does is he would write "go to" and then draw a picture of a devil. And so people started selling that as art. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a Ray Bradbury devil. So this is my Ray Bradbury devil. And here is George Clayton Johnson. This is when I first met him. And the picture is George Clayton Johnson, and he is reading this book that I'm holding right in front of you. This book. Vaughn Baudet was supposed to be our guest, but unfortunately he passed away, so his brother Vince came, and so this is a drawing that was done by Vince Baudet. Vaughn Baudet was known for Cheech Wizard, which ran in the National Lampoon. This was something that was done by a man named Eric Hoffman, who was our film coordinator. He made certain that we had, our film room well stocked. This is a drawing by Sheldorf. There's his signature. This was Jack Katz's First Kingdom. Willie Ito, Disney. Jim Steranko. Don Glut. Here is, I consider this very exciting, Dawes Butler and June Foray. This is out by the pool at the El Cortez. This is in the Con Suite. This is Bob Clampett showing this book and me. This is Larry Niven and me, Theodore Sturgeon, Igor Goldkind. Theodore Sturgeon by the pool of the El Cortez, that was his son Andros. This is Theodore Sturgeon and me and Igor Goldkind at one of the brunches, or actually it was the brunch in 1975.
What made that brunch special in 1975? Who was some of the guests?
Well, Chuck Norris, and then, as I said before, what I remember that was amazing is that somebody pointed in the corner and said, "That's Frank Capra, the director." And that meant a lot to me because, you know, I had seen so many of those films. My mother, you know, is a classic movie buff, so, you know, I knew all those movies, and so that was pretty exciting to me. Don't show my drawings, for God's sake. That's before I went to art school.
Okay.
All right. This picture is from the All Human Orchestra. It was part of the entertainment before the costume show at the 1975 convention. And they were all part of the All Human Orchestra. This is Roger Friedman, who was Dr. Raoul Duke. This is Barry Alfonso, although I'm sure he would deny it. This is Scott Shaw, and this is Brian Smith. This is Vince Baudet, and someone came dressed up as the character of Cheech Wizard, and Cheech Wizard used to be known for kicking people in the crotch, and so that's why that picture is set up the way that it is. This picture here was the Inkpot Awards ceremony, and among the few people I can point out is June Foray, Bob Clampett, Dawes Butler, Jim Steranko. I'm sorry, I can't identify more. And then this was the Denny's. There was a Denny's behind the El Cortez, and there's Barry Alfonso and Igor and me and John Heglin and his girlfriend, and, you know, just, this is the typical, you know, just go to the restaurant after the El Cortez. I'm trying to remember what year it was, but it must have been like around 2008 or 2009. I had seen Ray Bradbury at a book signing. I believe it was at the Beverly Hills Library. And so I brought a copy of the photograph I had scanned and this Ray Bradbury devil. And I showed it to him. You know, I mean, of course I bought his book, Will Always Have Paris, but I handed him this. And at first he looked at me like he thought I wanted to autograph it. And I said, "Remember, this was Comic-Con." And he laughed and laughed and laughed. He was such a big supporter of Comic-Con. He thought it was just hilarious. You know, like this is Sheldorf and Patrick Culleton and Richard Butner. You know, I mean, we ended up going on all, oh, you know what? Here we go. This is wonderful. Barry Alfonso is going to hate me for this forever, forever. Okay, this was dated March 7th, 1976. The next 4 pages, courtesy of Barry Alfonso. So these are drawings that while we were sitting at a meeting, at a Comic-Con meeting at the El Cortez, Barry was doodling in this book. And so these are Barry Alfonso's doodles. I can't even say what he was thinking about. These are just Barry Alfonso doodles. This was supposed to be Richard Butner. They're all, in fact, I had scanned these and sent it to him, and he said, "I'm really glad I'm not running for political office." And of course, one of my science fair projects had to do with giving drugs to spiders to see the effect on their webs. So that's supposed to be me giving drugs to a spider. I'm saying, "Want to get loaded." So I'd totally forgotten about that. Okay. Let's see. So now you see, you asked me what was a typical meeting like, and there you go. People were doing, I mean, you know, just doing that kind of thing constantly. This is Comic-Con 1976, and this is something that Jim Valentino did for me. And I won't say we had a thing going, but we did go out on a date. He was a really nice guy. So this is Jim Valentino, Comic-Con 76. This is a drawing by Rick Geary. And this is a little annotated cartoon by the wonderful William Rotsler. We lost him much too soon. In fact, I'm hoping that Comic Fest will do something next year that honors William Rotsler. Oh, this was very exciting to me. Brenda Starr was big at the time as a comic strip that ran in the dailies and in the Sunday paper. And to meet Dale Messick, the woman that drew Brenda Starr, was a big deal. So that's my Brenda Starr. And Theodore Sturgeon said, I know what you should call your next book because this one is called All Is Not Lost, Only Misplaced. And it's a pun on my last name. And he said, next year you've got to call your book, I've got it all together, but I forgot where I put it. So this is Richard Marshall, a political cartoonist. This is The Dragon Lady by Milton Caniff. This is the picture that I showed my mother, and she finally understood what Comic-Con was about. And so that was what made them come the next year. I'm very, very proud of this. This is my Joe Shuster Superman and Lois Lane. This is another drawing by Don Rico. This was a fan. I don't even know who this person was, but I think it's a wonderful drawing. This is Jack Katz. This is something more from Jim Valentino. As I say, we had a little thing going, so. Russell Myers. Mark Shepard, who's a producer. George Clayton Johnson. Sergio Aragones. So now begins Comic-Con 77, and that's my little takeoff on the Comic-Con logo, and kind of the idea of what happens typically at Comic-Con. I just put my own little talk balloons there, and there's the date of, or the dates of Comic-Con 77. So we start out with William Rotsler, and I love this, where he says, up to now this has been a genteel story of a sweet girl in search to find fulfillment and to lose her virginity. But from now on, it will be a search for depravity and utter debauchery. And that was kind of his sense of humor. This is a Mike Kaluta pencil, unfortunately not inked. This is one of my favorites, if that's even possible. This is a Bill Scott Bullwinkle. And Bullwinkle was big in our house. My parents and I loved Bullwinkle. So this is a Bill Scott Bullwinkle. And Bullwinkle is holding an Ink Pot award because Bill Scott had been awarded an Ink Pot. This is a Carl Barks Daisy Duck. This is from Robert Heinlein. He said to Wendy, who takes care of all lost boys, and with apologies to Sir James Barrie, and his wife Ginny said, what happens to the lost little girls? This is Stan Lind. He did Rick O'Shea, another Sergio Aragones, Jim Steranko, Harvey Kurtzman, Captain America from Jack Kirby, Rosie the Riveter from Tina Robbins. And if you'll give me a minute, I'll just flip to, yeah, okay, Jack Katz, John Pound, Don Rico. I love this. This is a Bob Clampett Bugs Bunny. Is that beautiful? Theodore Sturgeon. He wore a necklace that was in the shape of a Q with an arrow, And what that meant was ask the next question and the next question and the next question. I loved that concept. This was Kleben. He did an entire set of books about cats. And so this is a boy and his cat. And he made sure, he said, this is the moon. So he put an M so that I would remember that that's the moon. And George Clayton Johnson had an idea at the time for how to run a convention, and it was based on playing cards. And he could explain this better than I could, but it's how, you know, the whole thing should be set up based on playing cards. And here's a Scott Shaw. This was Scott Shaw, a self-character or caricature of himself at that time. And this is a Mark Evanier Scooby-Doo. Here we go. And this is Alfredo Alcala. And he taught me how to say in Tagalog, which is the language spoken in the Philippines, salamat po. So that means thank you. Marima salamat po is thank you very much, or beautiful, thank you very much. But I watched him paint this, and it was like, wham, bam. And it was the most amazing thing to watch. And then not to be outdone, because he was sitting next to him, Rudy Nebris said, well, you're going to get a Doctor Strange. So it was almost like a, duel of, dueling paintbrushes. And I just thought I was so lucky to have that happen right there. And I think that's the end of that. But, and here is I believe this is 78. Yeah, you don't want to miss that. Okay. So yeah, in 78, this Grim Natwick, who invented Betty Boop, I believe because his wife said he's not drawing anymore after this. He was very elderly and fragile. But this is a Grim Natwick Betty Boop that he did for me in 1978. This is a Steve Lealoa drawing. This is Frank Thorne. Here's another one. I mean, how can you have a favorite? This is a Bob Kane Batman and Robin. This is another Jim Valentino. We were still friendly. This is Dick Moore's. This is Virgil Parch. He did a lot of single comics, but he always signed his name. It looked like VIP, VIP. And this is John Dempsey. I believe he did some cartoons for like Playboy and things like that. And this is Bernie Lansky. If I'm remembering, he was a political cartoonist, along with Frank Interlandi. I remember reading his stuff in the LA Times a lot. This is Dave Thorne, who we just lost over this last year. This is Jaime Diaz, another Disney person. And I'm sorry, this was his friend, another Disney person. Roman, I'm sorry, I can't read his last name. This is Bob Foster, and he used to do this thing about mooses or meese or however but he did something called the history of moose kind. And so this was Pegamoose depositing Pegamoose poop. So I thought that was pretty good. And then this is an Ernie Chan Red Sonja. And so he said he made it look like me, and I said, if only. So, and this one is a Boris Vallejo drawing. He actually said, may I take this book and borrow it? And he said, do you mind terribly? I want to do a good drawing. I don't want to just... So I let him have it overnight. And he came back and found me, and this is what I got from him, and I was just astounded. I mean, I did not know how to thank him. I thought it was so outstandingly beautiful and wonderful of him to do. This is, gosh, I know that the name of it was called Out Our Way. I'm sorry I don't know the name of this artist. I really apologize. This is very interesting as far as political cartoons go. This was Dan O'Neill. He got in a lot of trouble for doing making fun of Disney, and he actually started something called MLF, the Mouse Liberation Front, and Disney sued him for doing this, and so he thought, well, once I've been sued, I can't be sued anymore. So he just continued, and this one is first Minnie overdosed, and then the tourists from Alpha Centauri showed up. Sometimes life goes like that. So it was a little bit out there. I think that's it on this stuff. Oh, you know what? Oh no. Here's Kelly Freese, who is an illustrator of science fiction book covers and things like that. And Larry Niven. And Larry Niven and I started a very long writing. We wrote back and forth to each other for years. And this is Mike Jitlove. You might want to zoom in on this. He really did have tiny, tiny handwriting. I believe this might have been, if it wasn't 78, it was the 79 convention. There was one convention I did not get a lot of autographs. I think that was it. This is my Friend of Fandom Award. I'm very proud of this. The drawing is by Jack Kirby. It's signed by Richard Butner, who was the chairman at the time, and Sheldorf, on August 4th, 1979.